who's visiting there today, is speaking again. Let's have a listen.
And as indeed we have stood shoulder to shoulder so many times in the last 100 years, that crisis is now upon us. It's 126 hours since Vladimir Putin launched a war of aggression on our continent, tearing up every principle of civilized behavior between states. He's hurled his war machine on the people of Ukraine, a fellow Slavic country. He's bombarded civilian targets, fired rockets at blocks of flats. He's responsible for hundreds of civilian casualties, including growing numbers of children, and also, of course, for the deaths of many Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. We must accept the grim reality that Putin will continue to tighten the vice. And if you go by the sheer size and firepower of Vladimir Putin's war machine, the odds have always been heavily against Ukrainian armed forces. But one thing is already clear, and one prediction that both Mateusz Morawiecki and I made last time is being proved right. This invasion of a free and sovereign country is not only a tragedy, it is a colossal mistake. Putin has lied to his people and to his troops about how this conflict would go, and he's now been caught out in that lie. They've not been welcomed to Ukraine as he prophesied. Their tanks have not been cheered in the streets or garlanded with flowers. Instead, Ukrainians have mounted an astonishing and tenacious resistance which has snarled up Putin's advance on Kiev and Kharkiv and delayed his whole invasion plan, because he has totally miscalculated the nature of the conflict and the character of the people of Ukraine. With every hour, the passionate desire of the people of Ukraine to defend their country has become more apparent, and millions of people around the world have been stirred and moved by their courage. The reality is that whatever happens in the coming days or weeks, the Ukrainian people have shown already that their spirit will not be broken and they will not be subdued. I've spoken almost every day to President Volodymyr Zelensky, and when I think of the dangers and the pressures, the physical dangers that he must be facing, I marvel at his coolness under fire, his bravery, his invincible good humor. I think he is mobilizing the world against the horror of what is happening. And as I said in Munich 10 days ago, Russia will not be able to subjugate the second largest country in Europe, encompassing nearly 250,000 square miles. Putin's war machine will not succeed in holding down Ukraine, even to hold down a part of that giant country, with the constant threat of reprisals and guerrilla attacks, would be militarily exhausting and economically ruinous for the Russian occupiers. And so it's already clear from the facts that we have right now that Putin will ultimately fail in Ukraine. And Putin must fail in Ukraine. And so the best thing for Russia and Ukraine and for the world is for this misbegotten venture to be halted and reversed as fast as possible. And with every day and hour that goes by, that amazing Ukrainian resistance is helping to solidify and unite the rest of the world. And if anything, Western unity and determination is growing stronger. Dozens of nations have rejected the easy option of sitting on the sidelines or adopting a policy of calculated indifference. And instead, they've chosen to take a stand, consciously risking retaliation from the Kremlin. They understand the stakes. They know that if Putin succeeds in trampling Ukraine, his imperial ambitions would not end at that country's borders. They know that the outcome would be a world where aggression has triumphed, where might is right and extreme violence pays off, and no nation would be safe. And they know that Putin's aim is to overthrow the post-Cold War order and destroy the vision of a Europe whole and free. The draft treaty he published in December would once again impose a Russian veto on the foreign and defence policies of a dozen or more nations at the heart of our continent, including Poland. And that is something the UK and our allies could never accept. And it is because of the implications of what is happening in Ukraine, as well as the sheer horror, that the UK has worked side by side with the European Union and the United States to devise the biggest package of sanctions ever imposed on Russia, and one of the biggest packages of sanctions of all times. And I'm grateful to for the determination of President Biden and President Ursula von der Leyen. Our efforts have intensified to the point where the ruble collapsed, or virtually collapsed, yesterday, even though Russia's central bank doubled its interest rate. Now we will do more with our friends to exclude Russian banks from the SWIFT system, freeze their assets, and restrict trade. And we will go further in our efforts to sanction those who are close to the Putin regime. We're now taking further steps to whip aside the veil of anonymity and freeze their assets. But I must emphasize that we are not motivated by any hostility towards Russia or the Russians, quite the reverse. All our hearts ache for the Russian soldiers sent to die in this futile venture. We all grieve with their parents. Only a few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, I visited St. Sophia's Cathedral in Kiev, which has survived every invader since Yaroslav the Wise built its granite walls nearly 1,000 years ago. It's modeled on Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, which was then the capital of Christendom. How tragic, how incredible, how inexplicable that the cradle of Slavic civilization and Eastern Orthodoxy should now be within the range of Russian guns. As I speak, a column of tanks and armored vehicles, 25 miles long, is grinding south towards the golden domes of this ancient European capital, a city of nearly 3 million innocent people who have done nothing to deserve the carnage that Putin is unleashing in their country. No wonder the Kremlin-controlled media refuses to tell the Russian people that their soldiers are attacking Kiev. No wonder they spin a tissue of lies and claim that Russia is merely conducting a special operation in the Donbass. Russia is a great country and civilization, and we will never forget her sacrifice in the struggle against fascism side by side with ourselves. We must emphasize every day that it is Putin's regime which is exacting from its own people an unacceptable cost for an unnecessary war, a war of choice that should end as soon as possible. And to ensure that Putin's venture in Ukraine fails, we must get over that key point, that this is not Russia's war, not the Russian people's war. This is Putin's war. And that's been increasingly obvious from everything that he has said and written in the last year. The UK, our government, first considered sending weapons to our Ukrainian friends because we read Putin's semi-mystical essay on the future of Ukraine, amounting to a manifesto for imperial expansion. That's why in January we sent 2,000 anti-tank missiles. Now, more than 25 nations are prepared to send defensive lethal aid in support of the principle of a country's right to protect itself. And I thank Chancellor Scholz of Germany for his speech, which I believe was of world historical significance. We should recognize the gravity of Germany's latest decisions, which have arisen from Putin's aggression. When I spoke to President Biden and fellow leaders last night, we focused on the humanitarian emergency that is now beginning. Putin's invasion has already forced hundreds of thousands of people to flee their homes, and we must prepare for an even larger outflow, perhaps numbered in the millions. Putin has already welcomed many thousands of refugees with, Poland, forgive me, Poland has already welcomed many thousands of refugees with compassion and practical help. And the UK will provide up to £220 million of emergency and humanitarian aid for Ukraine. And I've placed 1,000 troops on standby to help the humanitarian response in neighbouring countries, including in Poland. Many people in Britain will, of course, want to help Ukrainian refugees. So we will make it easier for Ukrainians already living in the UK to bring their relatives to our country. And though the numbers are hard to calculate, they could be more than 200,000. And if the worst happens, and President Zelensky's government is no longer able to function in Kiev, we must prepare to support them whatever happens in the weeks ahead. And we should recognize that this crisis will impose costs on ourselves and on our electorates, that sanctions have consequences for us as well as for Russia. And no step is free from risk. And whatever the difficulties ahead, and they may be considerable, this is now the moment for Europe to do something that is long overdue, and that is finally to wean ourselves off dependence on Russian oil and gas, and in the long term, reduce our reliance on fossil fuels from any source at all. All of us must proceed with wisdom and care and moderation. We have a duty to ensure that this crisis does not spread any further. But if we are to have any chance of ending this nightmare, then Putin must understand that his savagery will be met with unrelenting economic pressure, and that the West will be united in supporting Ukraine, and that we are ready for a prolonged crisis. I have no doubt that if the West can maintain the extraordinary unity that we have shown so far, if we can press ahead with the strategy we have set out of international, economic, humanitarian and diplomatic assistance to Ukraine, along with defensive weapons, then Putin's venture will ultimately fail. The path ahead will require patience and resolve, and we must be rational in our response and recognize that Russia is capable both of misunderstanding and misrepresenting what we say. And yet I will not waver in my conviction that however long it takes, a sovereign and independent Ukraine will emerge once again. Because Putin has stubbed his toe and tripped on a giant and immovable fact, which is no matter how many troops and tanks he sends, the Ukrainians desire to live in a free and independent country, which is something I think Poles will immediately understand. And in this desire, the UK will always give them our wholehearted support. And in the face of that fact, the unquenchable and manifest will of the Ukrainians to resist, and in the face of this gathering tragedy, I say to Vladimir Putin and his regime, there is only one way out of this morass, and that is to stop the tanks, to turn back the tanks on their way to Kiev, turn them round and take the path to peace. Thank you all very much.
Okay, that was Boris Johnson, who's in Warsaw today. He'll go to Estonia later, giving a speech there. He's been meeting with the Polish Prime Minister, just a key... Actually, he's taking questions. Let's have a listen.
In our societies, even in the late 80s.
Ukraine, particularly with regard to civilian casualties. It's not just the bombardment of built-up areas. We're now seeing use of weapons such as cluster bombs and multiple rocket launchers in civilian areas. Do you think that it is approaching a situation now where that can be described as a war crime, and should it be designated as such? Secondly, I'd like to ask you about policy with regard to refugees. 500,000, I think, have fled in the last 6 days, over half of those taken in and welcomed by Poland. You said that we're going to ease in the UK the ability of Ukrainians living there to bring relatives. Shouldn't we go much further, and isn't this the time to go much further, given the situation on the ground? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Raggy. So first of all, on Putin's tactics, there's no doubt that he's already using barbaric tactics, bombing civilian areas. I've seen the reports about cluster bombs and thermobaric weapons. They will, of course, have to be verified. But I think that everybody involved in the Russian onslaught should understand that all this will be collated in evidence to be used at a future time in what could be proceedings before the International Criminal Court. I hope people understand that. If you're going to use illegal weapons against innocent civilians, you're going to be brought to the bar of history, or rather to the International Criminal Court before then. And I hope that he gets that. As for the humanitarian crisis and what we in the UK can do, we have always had a tradition of welcoming people in large numbers from crisis areas, from war zones. So what we're going to do is we're extending the family scheme so that actually very considerable numbers would be eligible. As I set out earlier, you could be talking about a couple of 100,000, maybe more. Additionally, we're going to have a humanitarian scheme, and then a scheme by which UK companies and citizens can sponsor individual Ukrainians to come to the UK. So we're doing exactly what the UNHCR is asking us to do, and we will be in the forefront of helping the humanitarian crisis. We're out here in Poland trying to help our Polish friends deal with the immediate effects. And the UK has always done a huge amount. Don't forget what we did, for instance, with the Afghan refugees under pitting and other operations, as well as the British nationals in Hong Kong, just in my own time as Prime Minister, and we will do it again. Next question, please. From now you're going to have to forgive me. Do I say Jędrzej Bilecki?
Yes, that's me.
Jędrzej, how are you?
Great. I'm working for Rzeczpospolita. That's the daily here. Prime Minister, you said that the only way to come out of this crisis, this war, is for Putin to withdraw from Ukraine, but of course he's not going to do it for the moment. Do you have an idea of a compromise here? President Zelensky himself mentioned the neutrality of Ukraine, but obviously this would mean that Putin won. So do you have a vision for ending this war? And secondly, you said that you could impose further sanctions like the US and the EU could do as well. Do you think that this could lead finally to the fall of the Putin regime in Russia itself? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jędrzej. Well, look, first of all, I think what everybody in the international community must recognize is that the outcome is something that the Ukrainians themselves have got to will and to desire. And it's for them to decide the future of their country, not for people to fix it over the heads of the Ukrainians. If there's a way forward that they can envisage, then of course the UK would be supportive of that. But I have to say that looking at things now, it's very hard to see how Vladimir Putin can be cast as a valid interlocutor, given what he has done. That's the problem we face. Yes, I'm all in favor of negotiation. Yes, I'm all in favor of finding a solution. But how can you negotiate with somebody whose tanks are rolling towards Kiev and who is bombing innocent civilians? I think it's impossible at the moment, and I think that is the reality. And on your second question, no, I think the answer is that this is not about events in Russia. This is about Ukraine. This is about protecting the people of Ukraine and doing everything we can together to allow them to defend themselves and to have a sovereign, independent Ukraine. And that's why we've got the package of sanctions that we have. That's why we're willing, if necessary, and I think it will be necessary, to go further. And I think you asked what kinds of ways could we go further. There is plainly more to be done on SWIFT. We can tighten up yet further on SWIFT, even though it's had a dramatic effect already. I think we do need to go further. There's more to be done on Sberbank, more to be done on the freezing of Russian assets. I think there's genuine amazement and dismay in Russia about what has happened already, but there is more to be done. I think there's more to be done in the severing of sporting links. There's more to be done in cracking down on the billionaires who are associated with Vladimir Putin, and the UK is certainly going to be in the lead in that. There are plenty of more things that we can and will do as we tighten the economic pressure. Thank you, Geraldine Scott from PA. You can certainly ask a question from Ukraine, but can I go first to Geraldine Scott from PA, who's... Well, come on, you can definitely have a question as far as I'm concerned. Go on.
Thank you. You've repeatedly said that Putin must fail, but what does that really look like? And is it really achievable? You've spoken about this being, a protracted conflict. How long are we looking at? You also spoke about the financial hit that the British public will take. How much should they be steeling themselves for this? And finally, you're a father, Prime Minister. What did the front pages make you feel this morning with the pictures of the children that have died in this conflict?
So on your last point, Geraldine, I think I felt what everybody in the world felt looking at that this is absolutely senseless, and that no one, I think Vladimir Putin's a father himself, and no one can possibly understand how he has unleashed this conflict, which seems to everybody to be so futile. And everybody can see, I think, that the Ukrainians are resisting to the point where, you get your question about success, Vladimir Putin cannot now succeed. I think he needs to reconcile himself to that fact rather than endlessly doubling down on violence. And I fear his temptation will be to double down on violence, and even then he won't succeed. And I think we're now going to go to a question from Ukraine.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Daria Kaleniuk. I had Anti-Corruption Action Center from Ukraine. I passed the border a couple of days ago. I'm from Kiev. Most of my family, most of my team members are still in Ukraine, in Kiev, in Lviv. A woman from my team is now in Bila Tserkva, and she is there with 2 kids, and Russian military is over there, and she's so much afraid that she will be shot. Kharkiv, the city where I was studying, was bombarded today, fully, the downtown square. So you're talking about the stoicism of Ukrainian people, but Ukrainian women and Ukrainian children are in deep fear because of bombs and missiles which are going from the sky. And Ukrainian people are desperately asking for the West to protect our sky. We are asking for the no-fly zone. We are saying in response that it will trigger World War III. But what is the alternative, Mr. Prime Minister? To observe how our children are, instead of planes, are protecting NATO from the missiles and bombs? What's the alternative for the no-fly zone? We have planes here, we have air defense system in Poland, in Romania. NATO has this air defense. At least this air defense could shield the Western Ukraine so that these children with women could come to the border. It's impossible now to cross the border. There are 30 kilometers of lines. Imagine crossing the border with a baby or with 2 children. I'm so glad that Samantha Power is coming here to the border from the Polish side. Let her come to the border from Ukrainian side and see that. Britain guaranteed our security under Budapest Memorandum. So you're coming to Poland. You're not coming to Kiev, Prime Minister. You're not coming to Lviv because you are afraid. Because NATO is not willing to defend. Because NATO is afraid of the World War III. But it is already started. And these are Ukrainian children who are there taking the hit. You're talking about more sanctions, Prime Minister, but Roman Abramovich is not sanctioned. He's in London. His children are not in the bombardments. His children are there in London. Putin's children are in Netherlands. in Germany, in mansions. Where are all these mansions seized? I don't see that. I see that my family members, that my team members are saying that we are crying. We don't have where to run.
Well,
This is what is happening, Prime Minister.
well, thank you very much for your questions, and thank you for getting here today. And I'm glad that you have been able to get here. And look, I just want to say that I'm acutely conscious that there is not enough that we can do as the UK government to help in the way that you want. And I've got to be honest about that. And when you talk about the no-fly zone, as I said to Volodymyr Zelensky, I think a couple of times, unfortunately, the implication of that is that the UK would be engaged in shooting down Russian planes, would be engaged in direct combat with Russia. That's not something that we can do or that we've envisaged. And I think the consequences of that would be truly very, very difficult to control. What we can do is all the things that we are doing already, and providing as much help and support to the Ukrainians as we can. And as I said to you earlier on, the UK was the first European country to offer military assistance. Also doing everything we can to tighten the economic noose around the Putin regime. And we were amongst the very first to put that package together. And I have to tell you, I think that it will work. I think that Vladimir Putin's venture is doomed to fail. And I think that it will be extremely difficult for him to continue on the path that he is on. But in the meantime, as you rightly say, there is going to be a period of suffering for the people of Ukraine, for which Putin and Putin alone is responsible. He's taken a decision that I think many people around the world find absolutely inexplicable as well as inexcusable. And it will take time, I'm afraid, for us to come through this period. All we can do in the meantime is help people like your crew and your family to get out, to get to safety, help them with all the humanitarian support that we can provide, help them to come to the UK, and we certainly will. But I cannot pretend to you that this is going to be something that the UK can fix by military means, and I think it would be wrong of me to do so. But what I will say is that I think that this whole misadventure by Vladimir Putin has raised questions now about the security of Europe and what we do. And I think it was entirely reasonable of Volodymyr Zelensky to ask, for instance, for EU membership. And I think that NATO will have to think much more about some of the ways in which we think about European security in the future. Because clearly, if Putin can attack Ukraine in a way that is unprovoked, a completely innocent country, then that has big implications for the world and for the security of other countries as well. And that's why, amongst other things, the UK is intensifying our support, not just for Poland, but for the Baltic countries and for all NATO's eastern frontier. And if Putin thinks he's going to get less NATO, he's going to push back on NATO as a result of this action, he is going to be gravely disappointed. All that's happening as a result of what he is doing is that he is strengthening the resolve, not just of the Ukrainians, but the resolve of the West as well. And to get back to your fundamental question about why isn't the West actually coming and giving direct military support? Well, basically for the reasons that I've given. But I think you will also accept that the crisis, the tragic crisis of the Ukrainians is moving governments and peoples, think of the Germans, think of the EU, to do things that would hitherto have been unthinkable. And that is a measure of the sympathy that Ukraine is currently evoking around the world. And I have no doubt that that sympathy is going to be so strong and going to grow that people will not rest, as I've said, until this injustice is reversed and Putin is seen, not just fails, but is seen to have failed in Ukraine. And I think the whole international community will work together to ensure that your family, are able to live in a sovereign and independent Ukraine. And I'm sorry it's going to take time. I'm sorry it's going to be difficult, and I'm sorry for all the tragedy and suffering that you've experienced. But thank you very, very much for coming today and asking your question. I think everybody here has really appreciated it. Thank you.
So that was Boris Johnson there. He's in Poland today. He'll go to Estonia later, talking in Warsaw. He was responding at the end there to a very passionate question from a Ukrainian journalist who was asking, she asked about a number of things, but specifically the no-fly zone, because a lot of people have been asking for a lot of